I think school meals have gotten a bad rap just in general because the school meals program is thought of as a charity program, not recognizing that now school meals are, and the evidence shows this, that they are the healthiest meals that most Americans eat. Most Americans, if you look at this thing called the Healthy Eating Index, which sees how closely Americans are eating according to the dietary guidelines. And contrary to many people's beliefs, the U.S. dietary guidelines are based on sound science.
This is the Visible Voices podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Resa E. Lewis. In today's episode, I speak with Dr. Jen Cadenhead, a research assistant professor and the executive director of the Lori M. Tisch Center for Food, Education, and Policy in the Program of Nutrition at Teachers College, Columbia University, New York City. Interestingly, Jen spent more than a decade in actuarial consulting. So, as a second career, she is a nutritionist, including a PhD in behavioral nutrition with a specialization in nutritional epidemiology. I first met Jen when I attended the PPOD, that's Plant-Based Prevention of Disease, Nutrition and Lifestyle Medicine Conference, and Jen was a speaker. My interest was piqued when I learned about her work with the New York Public Schools lunch program. We will learn more about this, about Jen's work in advocacy, and about her research in the Association of Food and Cancer. Jen, welcome to the Visible Voices podcast.
Thank you, Resa.
So, we hear a lot about food insecurity. However, perhaps we should actually be hearing more about nutrition insecurity.
That's a great point. Food insecurity is when you just don't have enough to eat. But nutrition security, which is when you don't have enough nourishing foods to eat. The foods that you are eating, either they're inadequate for your nutritional needs, like your caloric needs, which happened more like 50 to 60 years ago, or more commonly now, where people are actually getting too many calories, but the nutrients that they're getting are not adding to their health. So too much saturated fat, not enough micro and macronutrients that help with all of the body functions.
I did some reading on a topic you actually know quite intimately, the National School Lunch Program, established through the National School Lunch Act, signed by President Harry Truman in 1946, I believe, shortly after Franklin Delano Roosevelt died. Now, the groundwork was laid during Roosevelt's administration with the help of Eleanor Roosevelt. The program initially provided nutritionally balanced, low-cost, or free lunches to children. It has since expanded significantly and continues to be an important nutritional safety net for American school children today.
As you said in our introduction, I run a center that studies food policy and education. We help things related to school meals. And one of the roles that we have been playing is to try to understand what the different changes or policies are in New York City public schools and how that impacts nutrition security, food security, especially for children. One of the things that New York City has been doing, which maybe even more recently than when we last spoke, is to roll out an initiative on providing more culturally appropriate plant-based meals throughout their menus by training their kitchen staff and offering new menu options. I also just concluded with a study at the end of last month where I was looking across all of the schools in New York State, and what I found was really interesting is, and I think it's related to that initiative, there are a lot of school districts that are trying to introduce more plant-based, culturally relevant meals, although not to the extent I think as New York City has. But what we found in our other study was that New York City, which is a very diverse district and a lot of kids that are at risk for food insecurity, was actually doing much better in terms of participation than other school districts that were large school districts across New York State. You know, we like to dig more into that data, but We think it's because of all the emphasis they've been putting on not just the menu items, but also nutrition education and getting the word out of how important school meals are, and also diversifying the amount of fruits and vegetables that children are being able to get. Like, for instance, they offer salad bars in all of their schools. So they're doing a lot to help children. I think school meals have gotten a bad rap just in general because the school meals program is thought of as a charity program, not recognizing that now school meals are, and the evidence shows this, that they are the healthiest meals that most Americans eat. Most Americans, if you look at this thing called the Healthy Eating Index, which sees how closely Americans are eating according to the dietary guidelines. And contrary to many people's beliefs, US dietary guidelines are based on sound science, sound nutrition science. I feel like a lot of those studies are as sound as any pharmaceutical study. I could say you could probably go toe to toe with understanding the pluses and minuses of those different studies. And school meals are the healthiest meals comparatively because Americans just in general eat a failing diet in terms of the healthy eating index. But the school meals are set to standards that really align with the US dietary guidelines. So when a kid eats school meals, they're probably getting, and we know this is true too, they're getting more than half the days or almost half the day's nutrients that they otherwise wouldn't get when they eat meals typically from home, which tend to be filled with lower nutrient quality foods, like a lot of ultra processed foods.
I love this share, and I think this is important for our audience to know about the nutritional value of the lunches they're getting in school. So in granular or in specifics, like what would we see in a school lunch that makes it nutritious and provides at least 50% of the nutritional value required?
Yeah, well, they have to choose 3 out of 5 components. And most Americans are getting most of their micronutrients from fruits and vegetables and whole grains. So at least half of their grains are going to be whole grains. They're going to get vegetables, they're going to get fruits, they're going to get dairy. They can substitute for a soy milk, which is more nutritionally complete than some other alternatives, and they're going to get a high quality protein. Most Americans get way more refined grains, very little fruits and vegetables, and the protein that they're getting, I mean, people tend to get plenty of protein. I guess you could split hairs over whether women are getting enough protein throughout the day. But just in general, you're not going to get kids eating fruits and vegetables. You're not going to get kids eating whole grains. And they'll probably have something fried, which everything that will increase their risk for chronic disease is what they are typically eating, like everybody else outside of schools.
There was a recent Journal of the American Medical Association JAMA article that talked about obesity in pediatrics and adolescents and talking about education and reducing the risk. And that if they are provided with nutrient-rich, nutritious meals and given education, that there is a greater chance of preventing some of these chronic diseases that are a result of nutrition behaviors later in life. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about your role in advocacy and in educating children about nutrition in schools.
Yeah, so the program in nutrition at Teachers College specializes in behavioral nutrition. And so all of our graduates are equipped to help create materials for students, for educators, for the general public on how to make that behavioral change in making better food and nutrition choices. So that's one. As an educator, I help prepare students to do that. And sometimes I help to create those materials myself, like with the work that I do with the Food Education Coalition. I advocate for that as well. So with that same group of people, so I help to run a group. It's called the Food Ed Coalition. And it's a group of over 600 individuals and organizations that do food education, food and nutrition education in New York City schools. So we help to advocate for that. And New York City has actually invested several $1,000,000 now over the last couple of years. Of course, it's a drop in the New York City budget, actually, when you think you have almost 1 million children and you've basically invested maybe $2 or $3 per student. It's not enough, but it is something. It's a start that a lot of other districts have not yet been able to do. But so I help to advocate for all the things that you need to be able to get food and nutrition education into the classroom. And then the third aspect is, as a researcher, I also help to either evaluate the efforts of programming or help to design interventions to see what's most effective as well.
I think most people, when they think about public school lunches, they don't think about healthy. They don't think about nutritious. Is there one thing, like one specific thing that has been shocker to other people to learn?
I think people are unaware of the fact that New York City schools have a wellness committee, and the wellness committee, they're made up of citizens within the communities where the schools are, as well as school officials and other interested parties. And they have set some of the probably the most aggressive standards in the nation. So, for instance, there's no antibiotics in the chicken. There's no artificial colorings or dyes in New York City public school meals. There's no fried foods. There's no pork. There's a whole list of things that the school district has to meet. And I've definitely talked to parents who are completely unaware that there are no fried foods. Just in general, though, in school meals, so the one thing that I will say, I think a lot of parents don't understand that school meals are formulated differently. If there are things that seem to be similar to what you might see in a supermarket shelf that seems to be more ultra processed, it's not the same in school foods. They have different standards that they have to adhere to.
This is exactly sort of the interesting things that I think people wouldn't know, like the no color dyes, the no antibiotics, the no fried foods, the no pork. I love this sort of granularity and this detail. When I think about public school lunch, when I was growing up, it was generally elementary school, but there's a lot of fried food, like tater tots were exquisitely popular.
Yeah, well, they still have those, but they're not fried. So you're going to get a lot less oil, a lot less saturated fat. So, the back end nutrient levels are more aligned with health, and people don't realize that.
I've had subject matter expert guests come on and talk about personal finance and the importance of education on personal finance for every public school child. Do you see a future where there would be nutrition and wellness education for every public school child?
Well, they already have health education. A small part of that, a very small part of that is nutrition, food and nutrition education, and they don't get it every year. But now they are making an investment in trying to get food and nutrition education out to all schools. Personal choice and responsibility can only go so far. You have to also set policies, set systems, and set environment so that people can make better choices. So it's great. I hope that they expand food and nutrition education. I hope they bring back home economics also, because if you can't cook, if you don't know how to cook, then you're going to rely on more processed foods that are designed to make you eat more, which our bodies crave that fat, crave that sugar, crave that salt, all those things that are typically associated with less nutrient-rich foods. But also, if you have an environment where it's super easy for kids to make a choice that's a less healthy choice, they're going to make the less healthy choice. They're going to wait to eat the yummy food that's right outside the school that's unhealthy.
And now, a word from our sponsor, which happens to be me. Get your copy, Microskills, Small Actions, Big Impact. In the professional landscape, significant improvement often stems not from sweeping changes, but from refined behavioral adjustments. This guide examines how deliberate microskills, Those are specific intentional behaviors compound to transform workplace performance. Drawing from evidence-based research, Microskills presents a framework for identifying, developing, and implementing these crucial capabilities that distinguish high performers. Rather than offering generic productivity advice, this work provides specific techniques that enhance decision-making, communication efficiency, and professional presence. Available in hardbook, ebook, and audiobook formats nationwide. To bring Microskills to your teams or learn more, reach out for a consultation. Resa E. Lewis, MD, via LinkedIn or through the website. In emergency medicine, when there is a medical error with a patient, it used to be that people would point at the person who made the error. And now the way quality improvement processes work, there's more looking at the system. What was the systemic area, or how did the system set up for this error to occur? You've highlighted that this is not blaming the victim and looking at the individual who's making these less healthy food choices. This is about a system that is not setting people, children, adolescents up for success. I'm wondering if you can say more about the systems being set up for success, and currently it's not actually setting individuals really up for success.
It's very complicated. You want to be able to support small businesses, but you often have those small businesses peddling the wares of big ag.
Ag is agriculture?
Yeah, agriculture. So I don't want to name the names, but there's basically 10 big food companies that kind of rule almost everything that we eat. And a lot of it is junk. And it's subsidized by our government, which they were the best intentions. I think when Nixon had the White House conference on food in, I think it was 1969, where people were having protein, energy, malnutrition. So the government set in motion production that allowed for a lot of animals to be fed so that we could get more chicken on every plate, more beef on every plate, which we should be able to get protein to people, maybe not as much as we have now and as easily as we have now. But also that meant that some of that surplus went into making a lot of refined grain products that are shelf stable. Things like soda, which are all subsidized essentially. So the really, really big picture is the ubiquity of the food items that we know are now leading to the development of overweight and obesity. And then that channels down into communities, especially communities like the communities that many of the children in New York City are in, where you have the small bodegas, and they also have very high overhead and limited resources. There's also this thing called the Robinson-Packman Act, which was established in the early part of the 20th century, so over 100 years ago, that said that commodity prices for foods should be such that everybody should be able to basically afford fruits and vegetables and all the healthy foods. But since the Reagan administration, it stopped being enforced. And that meant that big box stores actually have discounts for fruits and vegetables. And little stores in the country or in the cities can't really compete. So what are they left with? They're left with their tight margins, these shelf-stable foods, which are very low, relatively speaking, in nutrients. I just gave my students, my 32 students in my community nutrition class, an assignment to go out and look at stores. And I'm sure they're going to come back to me and tell me there are stores that they've gone to in New York City where you expect to see a fruit and vegetable, but you won't see a single one. When you combine all of these things and the marketing, which they're targeting these to children, how do you fight back against that as a kid? You can teach them as much nutrition education as you want, but unless you actually make the environment easy for them to be able to know what to do, like to be able to cook and to be able to also get access to these foods easily, because people are working 2-3 jobs and they're tired at the end of the day and they don't want to have to go out of their neighborhood to go find food.
Such a great illustration, and takes me into the other interesting part of what you shared. And you put this on my radar. When I was growing up, when I was in middle school, home ec was an offering. Now, to be clear, I didn't want to take home ec. I wanted to take mechanical drawing. So I took mechanical drawing. But the fact remains, home ec was available and offered. And it didn't even strike me as an issue or somehow a downstream consequence of where we are today by home ec being removed from public school curricula. Can you say more about that?
I think in the race to science and technology, we thought that these soft skills weren't that important and got rid of them. Some schools still actually have kitchens. I've been in some of those, which are pretty fabulous, but we got rid of them wholesale. We also got rid of kitchens in the cafeteria. So it's hard to find cooks in cafeterias that are really cooking, because in this race to modernize, we felt like we didn't need those things anymore. So, in order to have scratch cooked meals, you need people who know how to cook. And you also need things like stoves and knife skills to know how to season. That's maybe part of why people like eating out. The seasoning is good. It's tasty. So I can't blame somebody for wanting to eat food that tastes appealing.
You just described the system of why, when there are behaviors around eating and nutrition and food choices that children and adolescents experience, it's not surprising that when they are young adults and adults, they're making decisions that can lead to obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. And this allows me the opportunity to pivot a little bit and highlight the research and work you're doing in food choices, specifically ultra-processed foods and cancer survivors.
Yeah, I've been following a cohort at Kaiser Permanente that has been following women, about 4,500 of them, who are surviving breast cancers in different stages of it, and looking at whether there's an association with the kinds of foods that they're eating and their outcomes. And part of what we found is initially that their diet quality, surprise, surprise, is associated with longevity outcomes. And then also in unpublished work, we are also seeing that ultra processed food consumption is also associated with mortality as well. And it appears to be dose dependent as well.
So, in other words, the more someone eats ultra processed foods, the more likely the cancer will recur, or there will be mortality, they will die from the cancer?
We both looked at recurrence and early mortality. And for diet quality, we didn't find an association with breast cancer recurrence, but we found an association with early mortality. So the worse your diet quality, the more likely you were to pass away early, typically from cardiovascular diseases. So interestingly, what we're finding is that people who eat more ultra processed foods also, maybe not surprisingly, have a higher risk for early mortality. But we're actually finding the reverse. With the more minimally processed foods, the more likely they are to have recurrence. I suspect it's because they are living longer. So they have an opportunity to have recurrence. So correlation's not causation. It was kind of unexpected, that finding. But then when you think about when are people actually dying, it's like they're living longer with more minimally processed foods. So because you're living longer, which is not exactly the relationship we saw with diet quality, which is also really interesting. So it's suggesting that you get more life.
Are there characteristics or demographics that correlate with eating more of the ultra processed foods?
Yeah. So Native Americans had the most ultra processed food consumption and had the absolute worst health outcomes. And then African Americans also having a lot of ultra processed foods and having basically the second worst outcomes. And then we have Asian Americans who had the least amount of ultra processed foods and they had the best outcomes.
What do you hope will be the positive take home messages from this research?
That's a great question. I think that there's hope that people can make different choices if they're aware of it. And that can make a positive impact on your life expectancy, on your quality of life as well.
Jen, you have such a visible voice when it comes to nutrition and increasing food security and public school lunches. I'm wondering, when did you realize you had a voice and when did you start using your voice in this space?
Well, I had a life-threatening illness, basically. It left me with a lot of life choices I had to make pretty quickly. I wound up losing a lot of my large intestines, and I didn't know how to deal with that. So I went back and took a Nutrition 101 course, and it gave me a lot of understanding in ways that I had no idea about. I thought I was like up on nutrition facts, but just that one Nutrition 101 class made me realize, they didn't talk about ultra processed foods then, but I had thought like my whole grain bread was me doing everything right, but I wasn't eating enough fruits and vegetables. I would give my kids the berries instead of making sure I had the berries. I wasn't taking care of myself. I definitely wasn't eating according to the US dietary guidelines. When I did, I started noticing some serious changes in my life, a lot better health. And I thought, I should just dedicate my life to this, because if I thought I was knowledgeable and I really had a lot more to learn about all the other people. So I just decided to go on a different mission.
The Resa wrap-up. Special thanks to Dr. Jen Cadenhead for joining me in conversation. I really like the emphasis that Jen offers regarding the importance of nutrition security rather than food insecurity. And in fact, our children are generally getting plenty of calories, but the question is, are they getting the nutrients they need for health? New York City has made significant strides in their school lunch programs. And in fact, school meals often provide the healthiest options for children of the day. Advocacy and education are key to improving nutrition and behaviors around food. Why don't we bring back home economics? Finally, cancer. Ultra-processed food and cancer. Although not the majority of our conversation focused on Jen's research with breast cancer survivors, it's important to note that we're continuing to hear more and more about ultra-processed foods. Not only are they not good for children and adolescents in terms of making them predisposed to chronic conditions such as obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer, the science is actually showing, the data actually supports, populations that eat more ultra-processed foods do not do as well in terms of mortality. Ultra-processed foods are not going to provide us with the nutrients and the healthy food as medicine support that we need. That's all I have for you this week, audience. See you next time. The Visible Voices podcast amplifies voices in the healthcare, equity, and current trends spaces. We are a production of the People's Media Network. Our team includes Dr. Giuliano DePortu and me, Dr. Resa E. Lewis. Please find me through my website and on social media, Resa E. Lewis, MD, or through the podcast, thevisiblevoicespodcast.com. Please give us a 5-star rating on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, please be sure to share the show with a friend. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the institution with which they are affiliated or identified. Information herein should never be used as a substitute for clinical judgment or for medical advice.